Hello, gremlins! I have grown dissatisfied with the way I draw backgrounds, and today I've decided to try out a few new styles to see if any of them are preferable to what I've been doing. I'm also testing out a hack I saw online of using The Sims to create a background to trace, just so I don't have to think about the contents of this drawing, just the art style. And in case you're interested, here's my sim before we start. I started by creating a Photoshop document with 6 canvases. This will later be reduced to 5 as I realized I didn't have a 6th style to try. I then placed the Sims background I created onto the first canvas and began to sketch it. I only need to sketch it once. I can then copy the sketch to all the other canvases. The scene I set up has a porch with stairs and a railing, and behind it, a garden with trees and a pond. Given the most common backgrounds I draw are forest or nature scenes and buildings, I figured this would give me a chance to draw both of them in one scene. I'll be starting by drawing a background in my regular style, which while I do like it, tends to rely on specialized brushes, can be inconsistent, and doesn't match the way I draw people. Still, this is the control group of my background drawing experiment. Given I'm drawing the same background 5 times, I could take some shortcuts. For instance, the way I start my current background style is by drawing in all the non-plant or nature colors flat on different layers before adding detail and shading, so I can copy the flat layers over to some of the other styles I'm testing rather than drawing all those details thrice. I use a lot of layers when I draw backgrounds. Pretty much every new color, facet, or shade is on a new layer, so I can go back and detail them individually. When doing this 5 times, my Photoshop document will begin to struggle a little. With the architecture drawn in flat and copied over to other canvases, I started working on the more organic parts of the background, using textured brushes or brushes specific to things like grass or leaves. I've been aiming for realism in my backgrounds up till now, and while I don't usually succeed at realism, they do look more real than my people, causing dissonance in my style. They also take a while, and depending on the elements of the background, sometimes I have the perfect brushes for it, and sometimes I do not, leading to inconsistency. When I have all my flat colors in, I started adding texture and shading layer by layer. In this case, this means adding wood grain texture to all the wooden railings and beams of the porch. I'm actually using a fur texture brush for this, interestingly enough. It works pretty well for wood grain in my opinion. One of the problems with this style is how long it takes. I want the focus of my speed draws to be my characters, not the scenes I put them in, but often the background ends up taking just as long as the character. I'm hoping to find a style today that is a little quicker to draw and doesn't take so much focus away from the main subject of most of my art. I do have to admit, the style does look nice. It doesn't match my characters, but it is detailed, and while stylized, it does look a little bit real. If I'm just drawing a landscape, this would be the style I use. However, it's time to start experimenting with other ways to draw. I have 2 other styles I want to use that can use the same flat architecture assets. In fact, when I draw one, I can completely copy over the entire drawing to the other. One is going to be just flat colors, each color drawn again on a new layer. The other will be slightly shaded, but with just simple gradients and a soft brush rather than aiming for realistic textures. Both, I think, will match the flatter shading of my foreground art. I simplified some details for the background art. First of all, I'm not using any textured brushes. I also avoided using a foliage brush for the potted plant on the porch, instead drawing the leaves with my hard-edged brush. I drew the grass in by hand rather than relying on a specialized brush, and instead of the whole area being textured, I only drew in a few clumps of defined blades, leaving the rest of the grass flat and green, suggesting texture rather than rendering it. I also drew in plants in the background by hand rather than using specialized brushes, with the exception of the trees. There is a really good flat leaf texture brush that I quite like, and using it fits the rest of my style, so I used that for the leafy canopy. With some final details of mottled shadows below the trees and a wall at the back of the garden, I copied over my flat drawing to the canvas where I'll experiment with adding some simple gradient shading. I'm exclusively using a soft shading brush for this, adding shadows under the stair overhangs, railing beams, and on the foundations. I tried adding shading to each section of the tree canopy, but it ended up looking blurry and not good, so instead I just added a gradient of light at the top and dark at the bottom over the whole section of leaves. Finally, I added a little bit of vignette shading at the edge of the canvas, something I do quite regularly in my art to add focus. I'm not sure I like it here though, but it was worth a try. At this point, before I went on to the last 2 styles to test, I figured I'd better actually add some of my character art to see how it meshes with the background styles. I didn't want to draw unique characters for this drawing, as the focus is on the background, so instead I'm using the fantasy sonas I've drawn of the friends I mention on the channel occasionally, as well as my own sona. These drawings don't have any shading though, so I quickly added some shadow layers with my current cel-shaded style so that all variables of my art style are present. First, here's my own persona, Green, standing a little stiffly since I took their art from a reference sheet rather than a candid drawing. Next, we have Garnet the Gremlin, my oldest close friend and the person who was with me when I started this channel, as well as my first subscriber. Again, I added a quick shading layer to her art, as well as some grass in the front of her feet to ground her in the scene. I was going to put the Ravencat Gremlin in the next scene, but unfortunately her design has beautiful, huge raven wings and covered up way too much of the background for an art piece supposed to be focused on the background. So unfortunately, Ravencat got banished and instead the bearded gremlin took her place. Again, I added cel shading and some grass in front of his feet. And now we come to the last 2 drawings, for which I cannot copy my previous art, as these drawings will have line art, and doing line art after adding colour is a very frustrating process. I decided to test one version that is flat with line art and another that has simple shading, so I will be able to copy one of these drawings over to the other. I figured that since my character art also has line art, having lines in the background as well would unify my style. This did end up taking a long time, however, so it doesn't solve the problem of my backgrounds taking just as long or longer than my character art. Just like I do with my characters, I varied the line weight to add dynamics and make parts of the background fade into, well, the background. All the line weight is lighter than my character art, so it will not overpower. The more foreground elements, like the porch, have thicker lines than the trees and the pond behind them. I did discover that I much prefer doing line art of organic forms than of architectural ones. I struggled to make the straight lines look both hand-drawn and not too wonky. In order to keep my colours consistent, I copied the flat colours of the scene above and pasted them behind my lines. They don't line up at all, but I can select the colours I used, hide the layer, and then fill in the colours on the new art. This does make it more time-consuming than drawing in this style on its own would be, but I wanted all the backgrounds to match. Colouring in the line art takes a lot longer than just drawing the colours in on their own. I'm trying not to colour outside the lines, something I will start caring less about the further into the background I go, so I have to zoom in more and go more slowly. This also takes points away from this style. I could presumably use a fill bucket, as many artists use, however I do not like using a fill bucket. I much prefer colouring by hand with a brush, although if I were to adopt the style, perhaps I would come to appreciate the fill bucket more. I started using a paint by numbers method to keep track of my colours. I'd briefly show the underlayer with all my colours, then mark each section that would be filled in with a certain colour before hiding the layer again and proceeding with the colouring. This meant less referring back to my hidden layer, and it was easier to make sure each section of a certain colour was coloured correctly. I'm interested to hear your opinions on all the different styles I tried in this video. I'm still going to decide for myself which style I liked drawing the most and enjoyed the look of, but your thoughts will influence the choice that I make. And once I've decided, I'll probably practice a few backgrounds off camera to get used to my new style, before I start using it in my channel art. So please, comment which styles you like or didn't like. I'll probably also do a poll on Instagram. You should go follow me on Instagram. While I'm promoting myself, and while I keep slowly filling in this background, I have an Etsy store that I'm really bad at remembering to advertise. If you are interested in thrifted and hand-painted t-shirts, please check it out. It is always linked in the description of my videos. And I'd like the closet space back that I'm storing these t-shirts in so I have room to make more. Anyway, back to the backgrounds. With the flat colours done, I copied the line art background onto my final canvas, and just like I did with my softly shaded colours above, I started adding gradient shading with a feathered brush. This time, I started from the bottom of my layers. I was pretty tired of this particular scene at this point, so I was trying to change things up a bit. Again, I shaded the trees, the pond, and the shadows on the porch. And then I placed another character into the scene, this one, the fantasy Sona of my housemate, the house cat. I had to do a little extra editing in the scene to remove the inky paw prints behind her, since they don't work with the layout of the scene she's standing in. Canonically, the house cat is an orange cat who dyed herself black with ink to be more goth, hence the stains on her apron and skirt. Again, I also added some simple cell shading. Finally, I placed the Wizard of Iz, also known as the Wizard, on the final canvas, cell shading him in like I did the others. At this point, I realized I probably should also add some shadows under the characters in the various scenes, so I went back and did so on each canvas, trying to match the shadow style to the rest of the background style. And here are the final versions of each background. I'll show both the full version and a zoomed in one, so you can see the differences in each style and decide which ones you think work with my style. And here's all the backgrounds together. Again, let me know in the comments what you like and don't like about each of these, and remember to check out my Etsy. Thank you for coming along with me in my art style discovery journey, and I'll see you all next time. Until then, bye!